Florida State Prison, Starke. Death Row. 2025. Howard Steven Ault wakes up at 6 a.m., just like he's done for the last 14,975 days. That's 41 years. 41 years of waking up on death row, sentenced to die, but still breathing. He's 74 years old now. When he arrived here in 1984, he was 33, young, terrified, expecting to die within months, maybe a year or two at most. The state of Florida told him he would be executed for his crimes. They just never told him when. 41 years later, Howard is still waiting. His execution date has been set 14 different times. 14 times he's prepared to die. 14 times the phone rang with a stay. He's outlived 3 wardens, 6 governors, and 47 fellow death row inmates who were executed while he waited his turn. Here's the question nobody can answer. Is waiting 41 years to die more cruel than the execution itself? And what happens to a human mind when every single day might be your last? For 4 decades straight. Howard Steven Ault arrived on Florida's death row on March 15, 1984. His crime? The murder of a 30-year-old woman named Nancy Bowen during a robbery in Jacksonville. The prosecution proved he shot her execution style during a home invasion gone wrong. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. The sentence was death. Howard was a drifter, a drug addict, a man with a violent past. At trial, he showed no remorse. The judge called him a danger to society who deserves the ultimate punishment. So they sent him to death row. Back in 1984, Florida's death row was moving fast. Executions were happening regularly after a Supreme Court decision reinstated the death penalty. Howard assumed he'd be dead within 2 years, 3 maximum. That was 41 years ago. Now Howard sits in cell Q2215, a 6-by-9-foot concrete box at Florida State Prison. His hair is completely white. His hands shake from decades of stress. His mind has fractured and reformed so many times he barely remembers who he was in 1984. Hit subscribe right now because what happens to Howard's mind over these 41 years will completely change how you think about the death penalty. October 17, 1985. Howard's first execution date. He'd been on death row for 19 months. His appeals had been denied. The date was set. Death by electrocution in Florida's electric chair, nicknamed Old Sparky. For 2 weeks leading up to October 17th, Howard couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. His cellmate said Howard would stand at the cell bars for hours, staring down the corridor toward the execution chamber, trying to mentally prepare for what was coming. 3 days before the execution, Howard was moved to Death Watch, a special cell right next to the execution chamber where condemned inmates spend their final 7 to 2 hours under constant surveillance. Howard wrote goodbye letters to his mother, requested his last meal, fried chicken, mashed potatoes, chocolate cake, made peace with dying. Then, 16 hours before the scheduled execution, his attorney filed an emergency appeal based on new evidence about jury misconduct during sentencing. The phone in Death Watch rang at 11 p.m. A stay of execution, temporary reprieve while courts reviewed the appeal. Howard was walked back to general death row population, back to his cell, back to waiting. He thought it would be weeks, maybe months, before they set another date. It's been 40 years. Let's talk about what daily life looks like when you're waiting to die for 41 years. Howard's cell is 6 feet wide, 9 feet long. Metal bunk bolted to the wall. Stainless steel toilet and sink. 1 small window with bars and metal mesh. Concrete floor. Concrete walls. Nothing else. He spends 23 hours a day in this cell. 1 hour for recreation. Alone in a concrete and chain-link cage slightly larger than his cell, where he can walk in circles or do push-ups. Meals are delivered through a slot in the door. Breakfast at 5 a.m., grits, toast, powdered eggs. Lunch at 11 a.m., mystery meat, canned vegetables. Dinner at 4 p.m., beans, rice, something gray. No physical contact with other humans. All conversations happen by yelling through walls or down corridors. No television in the cell. Howard can have a small radio if he can afford one from commissary. He gets $40 per month from family that buys soap, toothpaste, instant coffee, stamps. Every interaction with guards involves being handcuffed first. Every movement outside his cell requires full restraints. He hasn't touched another person's skin to skin in 41 years. This is his entire world. 6 by 9 feet. For 14,975 days. And counting. 7 years after the first stay, Florida set Howard's execution date again. June 4, 1992. This time by lethal injection. Florida had updated its execution method. Howard was 41 years old now. He'd spent his entire 30s on death row. His mother had died 2 years earlier without seeing him outside prison. He had nothing left to wait for. This time, Howard actually wanted it to happen. The waiting had become worse than the dying. "Just get it over with," he told his attorney. "I can't do this anymore. Another stay will break me completely." His lawyer filed appeals anyway. That's the job. Howard was moved to death watch again. Same 72-hour countdown. Same constant surveillance. Same psychological preparation for death. 48 hours before execution, the appeals court granted another stay. This time due to questions about the constitutionality of Florida's sentencing procedures. Howard screamed when they told him. Not from joy, from rage and despair. The guards had to restrain him as he punched the walls of the death watch cell, sobbing, begging them to just kill him anyway. They walked him back to queuing, back to his cell, back to waiting. 13 more years would pass before his next execution date. Dr. Craig Haney, a psychologist who studies death row conditions, calls this death row phenomenon the psychological torture of waiting years or decades for execution. In a 2018 study, Dr. Haney interviewed Florida death row inmates who'd been there over 20 years. The findings were devastating. Every single inmate showed symptoms of severe trauma, chronic anxiety, depression, PTSD, dissociation. Some had developed full psychotic breaks from reality. The constant uncertainty, not knowing if you'll be alive next month, next year, next decade, creates what psychologists call perpetual anticipatory death anxiety. Your brain can't process it. Humans aren't designed to live in permanent countdown mode. Howard developed a coping mechanism. He stopped believing in time. Days don't exist. Weeks don't matter. Years are meaningless. There's only now, this moment, this breath, this heartbeat. He told a prison counselor in 2003, "I died in 1985 when they first set the date. Everything since then is just my body forgetting to stop." By 2010, Howard had been evaluated by prison psychiatrists 11 times. Every evaluation noted severe depression, dissociation, and significant psychological deterioration consistent with prolonged death row confinement. But he was still deemed competent for execution. Crazy enough to suffer, but sane enough to kill. Officer Marcus Daniels started working Florida death row in 1998. Howard had already been there 14 years by then. Marcus was 23, fresh out of Corrections Academy, terrified of working death row. His first assignment was queuing. He did the evening count, called out cell numbers. Inmates responded with their names. Q2215. Ault, Howard Steven. Marcus remembers thinking Howard looked ancient. Graying hair, weathered face, slow movements. He assumed Howard was in his 60s. Howard was 47. Marcus worked queuing for 18 years before transferring to another facility. During that time, he watched Howard transform from a middle-aged man into an elderly one. In a 2020 interview, Marcus said, "You're not supposed to get close to death row inmates. But when you see the same guy every single day for almost 2 decades, he stops being a case number. He becomes a person. A really damaged person." Marcus described Howard's decline. First 10 years, Howard still had hope. He exercised, read books, wrote letters. Next 5 years, the hope died. He stopped exercising, stopped reading, just sat on his bunk staring at nothing. Last 3 years I was there. Howard was a ghost. Physically alive but already gone. 20 years after his original sentence, Florida set Howard's execution date for the third time. September 13, 2005. Lethal injection. Florida State Prison Execution Chamber. Howard was 54 years old now. Half his life spent on death row. This time was different. Howard had given up fighting. His attorneys filed appeals, but Howard refused to participate. He wrote a letter to the court asking them to deny all stays. "I have served 21 years waiting to die," the letter read. The sentence was death, not torture by delay. "Please allow the state to fulfill its sentence. I am ready." The courts ignored his request. 3 days before execution, another stay was granted, this time due to a nationwide Supreme Court case reviewing lethal injection protocols. Howard didn't scream this time. Didn't cry. Didn't react at all. The guard said he just went silent. Stopped responding during counts. Stopped eating. Stopped speaking. For 6 months, Howard existed in a catatonic state. Prison psychologists diagnosed him with severe dissociative disorder. His mind had simply shut down to protect itself from another failed execution. Eventually, he came back. But the Howard who returned was different. Emptier. More machine than man. Just breathing. Just waiting. Just existing. To understand Howard's torture, you need to know about Gary Alvord. Gary was on Florida's death row from 1984 to 2013, 29 years. Same year Howard arrived. Same crimes, same sentence, same endless wait. Gary's execution was scheduled 6 different times. 6 times he prepared to die. 6 times he got last-minute stays. By 2010, Gary had been on death row so long that he developed severe mental illness. The courts ruled him incompetent for execution, too crazy to legally kill. But they didn't release him. They just kept him there, on death row, indefinitely, waiting for him to become sane enough to execute. In 2013, Gary died of a brain tumor in his death row cell. Natural causes. After 29 years of waiting for the state to kill him, his own body did the job. Howard was in the cell 3 doors down when Gary died. He heard the medical emergency, the guards rushing in, the stretcher rolling past. Howard told a prison chaplain later, "Gary got out the only way any of us will, feet first in a body bag. The execution date doesn't matter. We all serving life sentences disguised as death sentences." Here's something most people don't know. Keeping Howard on death row for 41 years has cost Florida taxpayers over $3.2 million. Death row housing costs $72,000 per inmate per year, triple the cost of general population. The endless appeals, another $51 million averaged across all cases. If Florida had sentenced Howard to life without parole instead of death, he would have cost the state roughly $1.3 million over 41 years. So Florida has spent an extra $1.9 million to keep Howard in a more expensive cell while waiting to execute him, except they haven't executed him. The economic argument for the death penalty, that it's cheaper than life imprisonment, is completely backward in Florida. Death penalty cases cost 11 times more than life sentences when you factor in legal costs, special housing, and appeals. Florida taxpayers have paid millions of dollars for Howard to suffer in limbo for 4 decades. And the suffering is the point, according to some prosecutors. In a 2019 interview, a former Florida prosecutor said, "The wait is part of the punishment. They are supposed to think about what they did every day for years. That's justice. But is it? Or is it just expensive revenge disguised as legal process?" If this is blowing your mind, smash that like button because the next part about Howard's psychological breakdown gets even darker. By 2015, Howard had been on death row for 31 years. A court-ordered psychological evaluation revealed the damage. Subject exhibits severe chronic depression, PTSD, dissociative episodes, and symptoms consistent with death row syndrome. Subject reports auditory hallucinations, intrusive thoughts about execution, and complete loss of future orientation. Subject's cognitive function has deteriorated significantly. Memory is impaired. Emotional regulation is minimal. Subject describes existence as waiting in a tomb. Howard told the psychologist he couldn't remember what freedom felt like. Couldn't imagine life outside the 6x9 cell. Couldn't picture a future because there was no future, only endless present. Time doesn't move forward anymore, Howard said. Every day is the same day. I've been living the same day for 31 years. The psychologist noted, subject has experienced complete temporal disintegration. His sense of self has eroded to the point of total ego dissolution. In plain English, 41 years of waiting to die had destroyed Howard's mind so thoroughly he was barely a person anymore. And yet, Florida still deemed him competent enough to execute. The legal standard for competency is shockingly low. Do you understand you're going to be executed and why? Howard understood. Therefore, legally sane enough to kill. 33 years after his original sentence, Florida set Howard's execution date for the 4th time. May 23, 2017. Lethal injection. Howard was 66 years old. Most death row inmates are executed in their 40s or 50s. Howard had outlived the average by decades. This time, something unexpected happened. Victims' families spoke out against the execution. Nancy Bowen's sister, Patricia, now 71 years old, wrote to the governor, "Howard should be executed. I believe that. But this isn't execution anymore. This is torture. 33 years of waiting is cruel to everyone, including us. We've been waiting 33 years for closure too." She argued that the endless delays and appeals had victimized her family over and over. Every time they set a date, we relive Nance's death. Every time they grant a stay, we have to process grief all over again. Just finish this or commute him to life. But end this limbo. 2 weeks before execution, the Supreme Court granted another stay, this time reviewing Florida's capital sentencing statute again. Howard's execution was postponed indefinitely. Again, Patricia stopped attending victim impact hearings after that. "I can't do this anymore," she told reporters. "I'll be dead before he is." Death row creates a strange community. Howard has had 17 different cellmates over 41 years. Most were executed. Some died of natural causes. A few were exonerated and released. One cellmate, Robert, was there from 2008 to 2012 before his execution. Robert and Howard shared that 6x9 cell for 4 years, closer proximity than most marriages. Robert was 31 when he arrived. Howard was 57. Robert called Howard Pops. They barely spoke for the first 6 months. Then one night, Robert had a panic attack, hyperventilating, certain his execution date would be set the next morning. Howard talked him down. "Listen to me. You're going to get really good at waiting. That's the only skill you need here. Waiting. I've been doing it 30 years. You learn to stop fighting it." Robert asked, "Does it get easier?" Howard was quiet. Then, "No. You just get emptier." Easier and emptier aren't the same thing. They became friends, as much as two men waiting to die can be friends. They'd talk through the night about nothing. Sports, weather, memories of freedom. When Robert's execution date was set in 2012, Howard helped him write goodbye letters, held his hand through the cell bars the night before. Robert was executed on August 14, 2012. Howard never got another cellmate after that. He's been alone in that cell for 13 years now. In 1984, when Howard arrived on death row, Ronald Reagan was president. The internet didn't exist. Cell phones didn't exist. The Soviet Union still existed. 41 years later, the world has transformed completely. Howard has never used Google, never owned a smartphone, never heard of Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. He has no concept of streaming services, Wi-Fi, or apps. The last movie he saw was in 1984. His frame of reference is frozen in the mid-1980s. When guards mention current events, Howard can't process them. Electric cars? Sounds like science fiction. A black president? He assumed the guard was joking. Time stopped for Howard in 1984, but the world kept moving. His sister visits once a year. She's 70 now. She brings photos of her grandchildren, Howard's great-nieces and nephews he's never met and never will meet. They talk through plexiglass. No physical contact allowed. His sister told him in 2019 that their hometown doesn't even exist anymore. The paper mill closed. Everyone moved away. The buildings were demolished. There's nothing left, she said. Even if you got out, there's nowhere to go back to. Howard replied, I died a long time ago. The world just forgot to bury me. 35 years into his death sentence, Florida scheduled Howard's execution for the 5th time. November 6, 2019. Howard was 68 years old. He'd survived colon cancer in 2016. His eyesight was failing. His hearing was going. He used a cane to walk. His attorney argued he was too old and frail to execute, that carrying out a death sentence after 35 years violated the 8th Amendment's prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment. The courts disagreed. Age doesn't exempt you from execution. Neither does time served. 1 month before the scheduled execution, Howard suffered a minor stroke. The execution was postponed on medical grounds. Florida requires inmates to be healthy enough to execute. The bitter irony: the state kept Howard alive so they could kill him properly. He spent 3 weeks in the prison hospital recovering. Then back to death row. Back to his cell. Back to waiting. No new execution date has been set since. It's been 6 years. Howard is 74 now. Still waiting. Still breathing. Still dying slowly in that 6x9 cell. Officer Daniels, who worked death row for 18 years, finally spoke publicly about the moral crisis of long-term death row in 2022. I signed up to work corrections because I believe in law and order, he said. I believe some people deserve to die for what they've done. But what we're doing in Florida isn't execution. It's slow-motion torture. He described the psychological toll on guards too. You watch these men deteriorate year after year. You see them go from angry and violent to broken and empty. You watch them age into senior citizens while waiting to die. And you start asking yourself, what's the point? Daniels talked about one morning in 2014 when he found Howard collapsed in his cell. Howard had tried to hang himself using bedsheets. We cut him down. Saved his life. And I remember thinking, I just saved this man so the state can kill him later. What kind of sense does that make? Daniels estimates that in his 18 years on death row, he witnessed 7 suicide attempts by long-term death row inmates. They are not trying to escape punishment, he said. They are trying to escape the waiting. The limbo. The not knowing. And I don't blame them. Why has Howard been on death row for 41 years? The appeals process. Here's how it works in Florida. Year 1 to 2, direct appeal to Florida Supreme Court, automatic. Year 3 to 5, federal habeas corpus petition, constitutional violations review. Year 6 to 10, post-conviction relief motions, new evidence, ineffective counsel. Year 11 to 15, federal appeals court review. Year 16 to 20, potential Supreme Court review. Year 21 plus, continuous motions based on changing laws, new evidence, evolving standards. Every single step can take years. Courts are backlogged. Attorneys file extension after extension. New legal questions emerge. Howard's case has been reviewed by 43 different judges across 5 different court systems. His case file is over 18,000 pages long. And here's the kicker. He's guilty. He's never claimed innocence. The evidence is overwhelming. This isn't a wrongful conviction case. This is simply the American death penalty system functioning exactly as designed, slowly, expensively, and agonizingly. The process has become the punishment. In 2023, a group of religious leaders in Florida petitioned the governor for clemency for all death row inmates over 70. Their argument: life imprisonment serves justice. Execution after 4 decades serves only vengeance. They specifically mentioned Howard, a 73-year-old man in declining health, poses no threat to society. Keeping him on death row costs Florida $72,000 annually. What purpose does this serve? The petition gained surprising support, even from some victims' rights groups who argued that endless appeals traumatize families. The governor denied all clemency requests. His statement: these men were sentenced to death by juries who heard the evidence. That sentence stands regardless of how much time passes. The law is the law. But is it? When the process takes so long that inmates die of old age before execution, has the sentence effectively become life, without parole anyway? Howard will likely die in that cell of natural causes, just like Gary Alvord did. The death sentence becomes meaningless when time does the killing instead of the state. Comment right now. Should Florida execute a 74-year-old man for a crime committed 41 years ago, or is there a point when time itself becomes justice? In March 2024, something extraordinary happened. A journalism student researching death penalty cases discovered a document that had been misfiled in Howard's original trial records, a police report that was never disclosed to the defense. The report suggested another suspect had been investigated and cleared without that information being shared with Howard's attorney. It didn't prove Howard's innocence, but it raised serious questions about whether his trial was fair. Howard's public defender filed an emergency motion for a new evidentiary hearing. For the first time in 41 years, Howard felt something he thought was dead: hope. "I'm not saying I didn't do it," Howard told his attorney. "But if the trial wasn't fair, then maybe I don't deserve to die after all." The hearing was scheduled for January 2025. Howard prepared himself for another disappointment. He'd learned not to hope. But then, in December 2024, the prosecutor who originally tried Howard's case came forward with a shocking statement: "I'm not sure we would pursue death today based on what we know now. The case had weaknesses we minimized at trial." The evidentiary hearing was postponed pending further review. As of February 2025, Howard is still waiting, still in limbo. But for the first time in 4 decades, the outcome isn't certain. Cell Q-2215, Florida State Prison, February 2025. Howard Steven Ault is 74 years old. He's been on Florida's death row for 41 years and 11 months. He wakes up at 6 a.m., same as always. The gods do count. He responds, "Ault, Howard Steven." His daily routine hasn't changed. 23 hours in his cell, 1 hour in the recreation cage, 3 meals through the slot. But something is different now. For the first time since 1984, Howard doesn't know what happens next. Maybe the new evidence gets him a new trial. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe he gets sentenced to life without parole. Maybe another execution date is set. Maybe he just dies in this cell of old age like so many before him. Howard told a prison chaplain last month, "I've spent 41 years waiting to die. Now I'm waiting to find out if I was supposed to die at all. I don't know which waiting is worse." His hands shake constantly now. His memory is failing. Some days he can't remember if it's 2025 or 1985. But he's still still breathing, still waiting. 14,975 days and counting. Nancy Bowen's sister, Patricia, is 73 now, 1 year younger than Howard. She's spent 41 years waiting for Howard's execution, waiting for what she calls final justice. But the justice never came. Instead, she's lived in perpetual limbo, just like Howard. Every execution date brought back the trauma. Every stay felt like the system failing her sister. In a 2024 interview, Patricia said something unexpected. "I wanted Howard dead. I still do. But this isn't justice for anyone. Nancy has been dead for 41 years. Howard has been dying for 41 years. I've been in grief for 41 years. Nobody wins." She continued, "If they'd executed him in 1985 like they were supposed to, I could have grieved and moved on. Instead, I've spent 4 decades watching the legal system torture him, while telling me it's for Nancy. But Nancy doesn't care anymore. She's gone. This is all for us, the living. And it's not helping." Patricia says if Howard gets sentenced to life without parole, she won't fight it. He'll die in that cell either way. Whether the state kills him or old age kills him doesn't matter anymore. I just want it to be over. 41 years of waiting has broken everyone involved. Howard Steven Ault sits in cell Q2215 of Florida State Prison, where he's spent 15,000 days waiting to die. He was sentenced to death in 1984. It's now 2025. He's 74 years old, in failing health, with a mind fractured by 4 decades of anticipatory death anxiety. Florida has set his execution date 5 times. 5 times he's prepared to die. 5 times the courts intervened. He's cost taxpayers over $3 million in special housing and legal fees. He's outlived the warden who sentenced him, the prosecutor who tried him, and 47 fellow death row inmates who were executed while he waited. The victim's family has been traumatized by 41 years of false closure. Guards have watched him age from a violent 33-year-old into a broken 74-year-old. And Howard, he exists in a state beyond punishment, beyond justice, beyond meaning. He's neither alive nor dead, just waiting in the space between. Is this what justice looks like? A man slowly disintegrating in a concrete box for 41 years because the legal system can't decide whether to kill him or let him live. Or is this something else entirely? A system so broken, so inefficient, so cruel that it's become worse than the crimes it's supposed to punish. Howard will die in cell Q2215. Maybe by execution. Maybe by old age. Maybe next year. Maybe in another decade. The how and when don't really matter anymore. What matters is that somewhere in Florida, right now, there are 73 other inmates who've been on death row for over 20 years. They are all waiting, just like Howard. Waiting to die. Waiting for justice. Waiting for mercy. Waiting for something, anything, to end the limbo. And every morning at 6 a.m., they wake up to the same reality. Still alive, still sentenced to death, still waiting. Just like yesterday. Just like tomorrow. Just like every day for decades. The execution date doesn't matter when you're serving a life sentence disguised as a death sentence. If this story changed how you think about the death penalty, watch this next video about the Florida inmate who was exonerated after 37 years on death row. Sometimes they get it wrong. Link right there. Thanks for watching. And remember, justice delayed isn't always justice denied. Sometimes it's just torture by another name.